Sell Crew, what it do? No, I'm just kidding. So here we are. Here we are at my UFC 300 full parlay for maximum profit. I'm going to level with you guys. I have spent the last 5 days locked away watching every single fight from every single person fighting on UFC 300, and I kind of started losing my mind. I kind of started going absolutely insane. I felt exactly like Heath Ledger described his experience getting ready to play the Joker. I honestly was completely disassociated from reality for a lot of that period of time. It probably didn't help, in all honesty, that to get into the spirit of Heath Ledger, I started using Coke and Xanax at the same time, which, that's not a good combination, but, it definitely helped me. It helped me, it made the process a good time. Let's just put it like that. So I probably will go down like Heath did, but, as long as I can make you guys some money on this parlay, that's all that matters, right? Last pay-per-view, UFC 299, my parlay hit. I turned $25 into $600. I was so close to adding Dustin Poirier onto my parlay, and that would have made the payout $1,700. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I just couldn't. It was too risky of a pick. It would have paid off, but when you're dealing with these parlays, you got to play it safe. You can't get greedy. So I'm going to go through every single fight on this card. I'm going to give you guys my thoughts. I'm going to let you know where I think it's a lock, where I think it's a little risky. I'm going to let you guys know what I'm going to be going with, and you guys can build your parlays however you'd like. Starting off, we have Cody Garbrant versus Deiveson Figueiredo. And now, when I first heard of this matchup, my first inclination was, Figueiredo should take this one pretty easily. But I will be honest, going back and rewatching Figueiredo's fights with Moreno did start getting me a little nervous. Because if there's one thing you cannot take away from Cody Garbrandt, he'll wing hooks at you like there's no fucking tomorrow. And in that Moreno fight, there were a lot of moments where Figueiredo was kind of stationary in the pocket, and he ate a lot of hooks. But watching his last fight against Rob Font really quelmed those nerves. The big takeaway from that fight was Figueiredo's movement. He was never stationary in the pocket. He was constantly circling, staying on the outside. Rob Font did have some success catching him at the end of his 1-2s, but he did a great job of circling away every time Rob Font tried to get into the pocket, and he was timing his punches so well. He'd land a good shot and then circle out again. And his power really carried over to the new weight class. He had Font hurt twice. And if he fights like that against Cody, it's pretty much as close to a lock as you can get. I don't think it's inconceivable Cody moves in and lands some good shots. But as long as he stays out of the pocket, which he did an amazing job against Font, it's going to be really hard for Cody to land. Cody's entire game plan is to hang on the outside, throw the occasional calf kick, do some dance moves, and then blitz in with combinations. And if Figueiredo uses his movement the same way he did in his very last fight, that is going to be really difficult for Cody to pull off effectively. Especially with Figueiredo's power and his ability to time shots. Because Cody has always been so fast, he's never really added feints into his game. He'll do it very occasionally, but for the most part, he just kind of moves his hands sporadically on the outside, which I think is going to make it even easier for Figueiredo to time counters. If Cody implemented some kind of Sean O'Malley, real jerky feints on top of his speed, I think he'd be really hard to read. And Deiveson is usually pretty takedown heavy in his fights as well, but I can't imagine he'll have a ton of success with it against Cody. He's definitely going to be the better grappler, but Garbrandt is just so scrambly. But if he times his takedown attempts off Cody trying to move into the pocket, it's just going to make it even that much harder for Cody to do anything. So 100% putting Figueiredo on my parlay. And now moving on to Jim Miller versus Bobby Green. Now, I really don't think I need to get super in depth with this one. This is what it pretty much comes down to. Bobby Green should be a 100% lock as long as he's still functional after that horrific stoppage in his last fight against Jalin Turner. That is very significant. That is one of those stoppages that could have taken years off of Bobby Green's life, and that was horrific. Putting that aside, Bobby Green, he moves way better. He's way faster. His ability to slip and find counters, it is just on another level. That shouldn't be up for debate. I think this fight is going to be a 100% lock for Bobby Green. But like I said, maybe his chin is now completely gone because of that referee in his last fight. Maybe Jim Miller touches him and the lights just immediately go out. But if he remotely returns to form, he should be an easy pick and he's on my parlay. And now we got Renato Moicano versus Jalin Turner. Now, I'm not going to be dancing around on this one. Jalin Turner is 100% going on my parlay. Moicano, super solid. Really good striking. His grappling's really good. If at some point in this fight they get into a transition where Moicano takes Jalin's back, then he is in serious trouble. Renato, he gets his hooks in so fast. He's so quick putting that choke on. I think his ability to take the back and sink the choke in, that is his best attribute. And we've seen in the past in Jalin's fight against Dan Hooker, if you get him down and he turtles, I mean, that choke is there. But of course, it's important to give some context to why they ended up there. Jalin Turner was beating the living Christ out of Dan Hooker. He had landed some of the cleanest strikes I had ever seen. But Hooker just completely disregarded his well-being, marched into the fire, and caught Jalin with a super clean shot, had him really hurt, poured on the pressure, and ended up getting there at the end of the round. But I would say Moicano is better on the back than Dan Hooker is. But here's my issue with him in this matchup. A lot of his skill set is based around how long he is. He is really good with those clinch takedowns. But what makes those clinch takedowns significantly easier to hit is the amount of leverage you have as the longer person. That's why he was able to eat Drew Dober alive with those takedowns. But against Jalin Turner, where he's going to be at a massive height and reach disadvantage, it is going to be way harder to complete those kinds of takedowns. And it's the same thing on the feet. Moicano loves to use his range, make guys have to close the distance, where he's good at slipping and countering. But now he's going to be the one having to close the distance. And something that's going to make that even harder is the fact that he has a tendency to not block high kicks very well. Against RDA, that head kick was there all day, and he even landed it very clean at one point and hurt Moicano really bad. Now, the one thing that makes me a little nervous for Jalin is sometimes in the clinch, he likes to go for Uchimatas. I think that would be a colossal mistake if he tries to do that to Moicano. He's just too good. He's too good from that position. You're just asking to get your back taken at that point. But, other than that, all around, I think Jalin should be the heavy favorite. But, like I said, it's a little nerve-wracking. The entire parlay might die if some kind of scramble happens and Moicano takes his back. But other than that, I am very confident in picking Jalin Turner, and he will be on my parlay. And now we got Diego Lopes versus Sodiq Yusuff. Now, first and foremost, just get this out of the way. This one will not be going on my parlay. Overall, I would be leaning towards Diego Lopes to win. I think all around he's a bit more skillful, but there is just a lot of risk in this fight. Diego's boxing, super good. His jiu-jitsu off of his back is insane. For him to go out there and do what he did to Movsar Evloev on short notice is crazy. He had him deep in a lot of submissions. In the third round, he was completely gassed, given the fact he took this fight on short notice, but he was still able to sweep him with a Kimura. I am on the hype train, 100%. But the thing that makes me a little worried in this matchup is Diego likes to use very slight head movement in the pocket to land shots. And because of that, he is hittable. He does get tagged. And Sodiq Yusuff, for one, very well-rounded himself. Super jacked. He hits really hard, and his entire game plan on the feet is to walk you down and load up on big shots. And he throws them well. He's not winging these crazy haymakers, but he does load up. And I'm telling you, there's going to be a moment in this fight that they are both in the pocket exchanging. And I think overall, Diego is the more skillful boxer, and I think he is the better grappler. But Yusuff's a very good grappler himself. He's very strong in clinch exchanges, and just overall, if you're going to be in the pocket striking with him, you will not be going on my parlay. Gotta minimize some risk here. Alrighty, now we got Kayla Harrison versus Holly Holm, and I'm gonna keep this one kind of brief just because if we were judging them skill for skill, then I would say Kayla's going to take her down and probably just hold on to her for 3 rounds. Holly has always had issues with grapplers. Harrison's striking for, women's MMA standards isn't horrible. So, you'd think she'd be a pretty easy pick. But the weight is a huge question mark. MMA On Point came out with a video pretty recently where a fight dietitian broke down for an entire hour about how this weight cut is going to be catastrophic for Kayla Harrison. I mean, she is huge. For pretty much her entire judo career, she competed at 170 pounds. At the PFL, she fought at 155. So all of a sudden, that Holly Holm at a plus 380 underdog seems a little enticing. But then you have Dana White coming out saying that Harrison has done 2 test cuts to 135 and she was able to do it. So I don't fucking know. I mean, no one knows. It's a complete mystery how she'll look at 135, if she can even make 135, so it ain't going on the parlay. Aljamain Sterling versus Calvin Kattar. The issue with predicting this one is you're going to have to make some assumptions about how Aljo is going to look at 145. Now, he's made it clear in some of the videos that he's put out recently that he's not putting on any extra weight, which I don't think he would need to. He said outside of camp he'd get up to 175 pounds, which is massive. So purely weight-wise, he's not going to be a small 145er, but the thing I'm worried about for him is he kind of losing all the advantages he had at 135? Because Aljo was never the fastest, he was never the most explosive, but at 135 pounds, he was freakishly strong in the clinch and very long for the weight class. He's now giving that up at 145. Against Peter Yan and Henry Cejudo, he had both the size and the reach advantage. Especially against Cejudo, that reach was a huge advantage. As far as the wrestling goes, out in the open, he was pretty outskilled. He wrestled Division III. Cody Brundage, who's supposed to be a can, was a higher level college wrestler than Aljo was. But when Aljo got Cejudo up against the fence, it was clear for 1, how much stronger he was, and 2, how good he was at digging underhooks and connecting his hands because of how long he was. But when he fought Sean O'Malley, someone taller, longer, he had a really tough time closing the distance, only having 2 takedown attempts the entire fight. Now, I know some certain very well-informed, smart analysts had the genius takeaway of, he just didn't shoot. Aljo just didn't shoot on Sean for some reason. He chose not to. That's not true. If you're a wrestler fighting someone taller, longer, who is a very good striker with a lot of power, you can't just take a bad shot on them out in the open. It's not going to work. You have to time the takedown very well, but Sean was not overextending himself at all. He was only throwing teeps and jabs. The first meaningful punch Sean threw was a counter to Aljo trying to close the distance. In the case of when Aljo fought Corey Sandhagen, for one, Corey doesn't have that same kind of one-punch knockout power that Sean has, but he also made the mistake of throwing that body kick naked. Aljo was able to catch it, giving him the perfect opportunity to go for the takedown. Well, he's fighting a guy in Calvin Kattar, just as tall as Sean, just as long, but also bigger and stronger, who also never overextends themselves. In some of the videos Aljo's been putting out in the lead up to this fight, he's been making the claim that, because of how big he is, he was never meant to fight at 135. You were able to make championship weight multiple times, you defended the belt, and proved that you had cardio to go 5 rounds. So, I understand it was very hard to make 135. I don't know if you were never meant to compete at that class. But we're here now at 145. So, how is Aljo planning on closing the distance? A big factor in Aljo's fight with Sean was how O'Malley was constantly circling and constantly moving. He was never a stationary target. Which, of course, as a wrestler looking to time a shot, you want a guy who's not moving. Well, Kattar isn't one to keep up that same kind of movement as Sean, which is going to give Aljo a bit of an advantage. But still, Aljo wants to do anything but throw punches with Calvin. That would be catastrophic for him, I think. But when you look at some of Aljo's most recent sparring footage, the 2 things you see is him shooting a lot of takedowns, of course, but him throwing a lot of kicks, which I think is probably a smart strategy against someone like Kattar. Calvin is not going to want to be marching Aljo down trying to pressure him. That's just going to open up the takedown. So it's not a terrible idea for Aljo to want to stay more on the outside, throw a lot of kicks, and try to get Kattar to be the one to move forward. But still, being the shorter guy, it makes it harder to pull off this strategy. One thing is for sure, it doesn't matter who you are, if Aljo can get a takedown or cause a scramble and get you to turtle, and he slides his hooks in and puts on that body triangle, you're in trouble. It doesn't matter who you are. For Kattar, I'm sure a huge portion of his fight camp is fighting the hands, preventing the rear naked choke, so he'll probably be able to defend, but he's not getting out of that body triangle. No way. So overall, you can make an amazing argument to why Calvin Kattar is a great bet as the underdog to add on the parlay. 100%. But at the end of the day, for me, when I'm doing these big parlays, I do not like betting on an assumption. And as of right now, that is all we can do is just assume how he's going to look at 145. Until we see him there, we're not going to know how he holds up. So as the underdog, I do not think Calvin Kattar is a bad bet at all, but he will not be going on my parlay. Jiri Prochazka versus Alexander Rakic. I am very surprised that Jiri is the underdog. A slight underdog, albeit, but underdog nonetheless. I think the reason for this is, in comparison to Jiri, Rakic fights very traditional. He throws a lot of 1-2s right down the middle and a lot of leg kicks. As we saw in Jiri's last fight against Pereira, he did not defend a single leg kick. He ate every single one, and it was really having an effect on him. And because Jiri fights with his hands down and likes to pressure a lot, it would make sense that he'd be vulnerable to Rakic's straight shots. But the one tendency Rakic has that worries me in this matchup is that he allows himself to get backed up to the fence. And it's during times like that I think Jiri's offense is going to really open up. I think he's going to have the power advantage. And the way Jiri throws his uppercuts from these weird angles right in the pocket, it's going to make him very dangerous. Of course, because of Jiri's unorthodox pressure style, he is open to get hit. And of course, Rakic is capable of knocking out anybody, but I don't think he has that same ability of someone like Alex Pereira at landing those short, accurate punches in close. And not to mention, Jiri is just a fucking maniac. It was crazy when he was fighting Ozdemir. There was a moment where Jiri got tagged with like a 6-punch combination. Cleanly, Jiri was very rocked, and he didn't even put his hands up. He just slipped the 7th punch and then calmly walked back out to range. On the outside, Rakic is going to have the advantage, but his tendency to allow guys to pressure him is going to be an issue against Jiri. Honestly, I think Rakic's best bet to win is to shoot whenever Jiri closes the distance. Yeah, he doesn't wrestle much, but he has shown to be capable of doing it, and I really did not like Jiri's takedown defense against Glover. The way he kept trying to roll away was just awful. That's not good. That's not good. But like I said, I'm leaning towards Jiri to win. But because he got rocked against Dominic Reyes, Volkan Ozdemir, Glover Teixeira, Alex Pereira, and pretty much every single fight he's ever had, I won't be adding him to my parlay. Maybe I'll change my mind. I think he is the second best underdog pick you could possibly make on this card. But it's a risk, and I think you guys know how I feel about risks and parlays by now. And now we move on to my Lord and Savior, Charles Oliveira against Arman Tsarukyan. I've already made multiple full-length videos on this matchup already. So if you want a real in-depth breakdown, I'd go check those out. But overall, here's what I would say. Arman Tsarukyan, he has a ton of power. He has really good high kicks. And at range, is a very scary guy to fight because of his ability to explode. But because Charles keeps up a high guard, I think he's going to do a very good job defending the high kicks, as we've seen him do before. And since Charles likes to pressure his opponents, he does it to every single person he fights, Arman is going to have to fight on the inside. And Arman does not have the same ability as someone like Dustin Poirier at landing short counters from in close. We've seen Arman has a tendency to march into range and leave himself very vulnerable, and he has been rocked multiple times. So on the feet, I give a massive advantage to Charles. Not many people can drop Justin Gaethje like he did. Not even Michael Chandler could do that. But it's not because Oliveira has more power than Chandler. He doesn't. He just times his shots a lot better. But of course, Arman Tsarukyan is a very, very high-level wrestler, and I am a little nervous for Charles because he does have a tendency to like to play from full guard. And he is one of the very few guys who are elite from that position. But Arman Tsarukyan, he's small, bulky, compact, with a lot of power. It's going to be really tough to submit him. And his ground and pound, it is devastating. Absolutely devastating. Of course, on the mat, Charles has the better jiu-jitsu. Arman Tsarukyan said this himself. So for Charles to win this fight, he needs to keep his guard open and he needs to be looking to cause scrambles by attacking submissions, just like he did when he fought Kevin Lee. If he does this, he's going to force Arman on the defensive, and that's going to either allow Charles to stand back up or to keep attacking submissions, which is rated very highly on the judging criteria. But if Charles decides he's going to stay in full guard, look to block shots and land hammer fists, maybe he could pull it off, but I think he's giving Arman more of an opportunity to win rounds. I wouldn't say Charles is a lock by any means, but I think this fight is a lot more predictable than some of the prior ones, and Charles being a plus 200 underdog, this one has got to go on the parlay. Cody Brundage versus Bo Nickal. Now, Cody, as many of you guys know, is being put out there to lose. He is not supposed to win this fight. Bo is a minus 2,400 favorite. And, the reason for that is the gap between them when it comes to wrestling is just going to be colossal. I mean, Cody was a high-level Division II wrestler, and, his takedowns aren't that bad. But as far as fighting on the ground, he's definitely a bit lacking. His submission defense isn't great. He gives up his back a lot. He doesn't do a very good job of fighting off the hooks. And he has a really bad habit of jumping guillotine and being unable to finish. So in theory, as far as the grappling goes, he should get destroyed. But on the feet, it is a little interesting. Bo Nickal has only had 5 professional fights. And Brundage's striking, it's not terrible. He was able to drop Rodolfo Vieira. He certainly has power. He throws with a good amount of speed. When he blitzes with strikes, it is pretty dangerous. Though, of course, the blitz is going to open up the takedown. But if this fight stays on the feet for any prolonged period of time, it will be interesting. Interesting enough that I'm not taking the risk on a minus 2,400 favorite. That payout just isn't worth it. Bo is the obvious pick here, of course. But, like I said, Cody is dangerous on the feet. And Bo Nickal only being 5 fights into his professional career, I don't want to risk it on a payout that's not going to be very substantial. Justin Gaethje versus Max Holloway. Now, this is another one. I've done a full breakdown prior, but to summarize all that, when this fight first got announced, nobody, including myself, gave Max Holloway a shot, and that's just for the simple fact that it's very difficult to move up in weight. He had tried before against Dustin Poirier, and the size difference in that fight was huge. That fight just wasn't fair. But Max has made it clear since then that he is looking to put on weight, and he says he will be a real 155-pounder for this fight. Now, still, I'm a little weary about that. What I would have liked to see him do is take a few months, really bulk up, and then get into training camp, and then cut to get as lean as possible with all that new muscle. But he's bulking through his training camp, which isn't ideal, but it's better than nothing. So if we give Max the benefit of the doubt and say they're going to be the exact same size going into this fight, then I think the fight has the potential to get pretty close. The thing that makes Max Holloway so good is his volume paired with his chin. Max likes standing right in front of you, lighting you up with long combinations. And because he's right in the pocket, he is hittable. But his chin is so strong that he just eats it and then lands more punches on you. And it's a snowball effect. Then you start getting lit up, you start getting overwhelmed, you start shelling up, and then he just pours on the pressure more and more. You look at the Calvin Kattar fight, there were moments in the beginning of that fight that Kattar was catching Max pretty cleanly, but he was never able to hurt him, so Holloway just never stopped. And Kattar, he got overwhelmed. So if we were looking at old Justin Gaethje, the Gaethje that would just tuck his chin, move forward, and never stop throwing, and his only goal was to break you, then a full-sized 155-pound Max Holloway would be a lock. He'd be sliding in and out of range, eating the occasional shot, but really pouring on the pressure. And when you start getting into those 3rd, 4th, 5th round, Gaethje would have been in trouble. But we're talking about new Justin Gaethje, who is way more technical, way more patient, and is looking to land counters, which he does very successfully against really heavy hitters. So, since Max isn't going to have the height or the reach advantage, he's going to have to be the one closing the distance here. And the way we've seen Gaethje enter in and out of range with strikes in his last few fights, I think Max is definitely going to get tagged. But in theory, a properly sized Holloway should be able to handle the power and keep coming. And when you look back at Gaethje's fights against Khabib and Charles Oliveira, he really struggled with the pressure. Typically Gaethje was one of those guys who thrived in the fire, forehead to forehead with you, being super calm, cool, and collected and causing damage. But when he fought Khabib, he was scrambling whenever Khabib entered into range. And against Oliveira, he was throwing these huge, crazy hooks way out of range and falling over. Just, in those two fights, he did not handle the pressure well at all. Now, the exact reason for that, no one can be 100% sure. It might be the fact that Gaethje, he is a good wrestler. It is not easy to take him down, but he does not know any jiu-jitsu at all. So when you get him down, he's a baby. And he's fighting two very high-level grapplers, so that may have been the reason. Maybe it was because he was fighting for a world title. Who knows? The one thing that is objective, though, is that he wilted under an immense amount of pressure from his opponent. So if Max is constantly in his face, tanking every shot Gaethje lands and just pours on the pressure more and more and more, it's possible he's able to replicate that. But then, of course, the last variable we need to look at is the leg kicks. Now, in the past, Holloway has been very susceptible to them. In the first Volkanovski fight, Volk used it expertly to interrupt Max's rhythm. Every time Max started to try to put the pressure on, Volk would land a leg kick and then get out of range. But in the rematch, Max really caught Volkanovski off guard by changing his style. Volk and his team refer to this Max Holloway as Muay Thai Max. He was standing a lot more upright, and he was pulling out every time Volk threw a leg kick. So we are 100% going to see Max use this stance in this fight. He'd be insane not to. Now, the thing about Gaethje, though, is that he will slip your punch in the pocket and then throw a leg kick from 6 inches away, which is insanely difficult to stop. So by no means do I think Holloway is going to be able to completely negate the leg kicks, but also I've never actually seen Max troubled by a leg kick. I've never seen him limp. So I think it's possible Max, towards the end of the fight, really starts taking over, really starts pouring on the pressure, and I think it's possible he finds the win. I'm still leaning towards Gaethje, I would say pretty heavily. But I think the best possible bet you can make for this matchup, and the one that I'm going to be adding to the parlay, is that this fight will be going past 2.5 rounds. I think that is probably the safest possible bet you can make, unless someone eats a flush head kick or someone gets eye poked and it gets called a no contest. But other than that, I think it is a lock for plus 2.5 rounds. And now to the co-main event, Zhang Weili versus, let's call her Yan. Zhang Weili is about as close to a lock as you can possibly get. I think on the feet, it's pretty close. Yan might actually edge her out on the feet slightly, maybe. But when it comes to the grappling, which Zhang Weili has shown to be, for one, freakishly strong in the grappling exchanges, and very high level with submissions. Yan, when she fought Carla Esparza, got taken down at will and then dominated on the ground. I think that's really all that needs to be said. Zhang Weili is a gimme on this parlay. Gotta put her in there. And now, last but not least, the main event, Jamahal Hill versus Alex Pereira. This fight is going to be taking place 9 months after Jamahal Hill tore his Achilles, which means Hill got into training camp 7 months after tearing his Achilles, which is a very, very short time frame. Typically, when you rupture your Achilles, even if you're taking the best possible peptides, the best possible steroids you can to fully heal and recover as quick and as good as you can, it's still going to take a year before you can get into hard training again. But, who knows? Maybe Jamahal Hill just heals a lot faster than the average person. So, for the sake of having all bases covered for this breakdown, let's just pretend Jamahal Hill is at 100%. Now, the reason Jamahal Hill would be very confident in this matchup is Alex uses that Muay Thai kickboxing stance, which means he stands very tall and doesn't have a whole lot of head movement. Now, typically Thai fighters combat this by having a really high guard, but Pereira keeps his hands down. So for a really high-level boxer throwing straight shots, this is the kind of guy you want to be fighting. And there is footage of Pereira doing boxing sparring with what appears to be a very good boxer, and he was landing a lot of straight shots. But to me, the one thing that was clear about that sparring session was Pereira was there to learn, he wasn't there to win, because he chose to stay in the pocket and fight from boxing range. Usually when he's fighting, when his opponents move in with punches, he backs away. He stays defensively safe. And the reason he keeps his hands so low is so he can land short, accurate, and deadly counters like he did against Jiri. Jiri closed the distance, he was trying to pressure, and when you look at the shot that Pereira landed on him, there was zero windup. He didn't load up at all. The punch came straight from his hip, it was short, deadly, and accurate. And that's what makes Pereira's hands-down style so dangerous. Now, the one time that it does make him vulnerable is when you back him up to the fence. When he's unable to back up and move away, that's when the straight shots are really going to be able to land. And that is when Jiri had Alex in the most amount of trouble. So, to me, that is the big question when looking at this fight. Is Jamahal Hill going to be able to pressure Alex up against the fence? There is this really weird narrative going around that Pereira is chinny. The people do not trust his chin, and they think that Hill is going to knock him out. Look, it is possible he knocks him out, of course. At the end of the day, it's human anatomy. If a shot lands right on the edge of your chin, you're going to go to sleep. But this notion that Pereira specifically does not have a strong chin is absurd to me. The one time we saw him get knocked out was at 185, where he was cutting an insane amount of weight, which has a huge effect on your chin. And even then, he got knocked out because Adesanya was playing possum. He was acting like he was really hurt. Well, he probably was really hurt, but he was shelling up, hoping that Pereira unloaded on him so he can land a full power overhand, which he did. Adesanya put everything he had into that shot, and he landed very cleanly. And when he rocked him in the first fight, it was a very similar thing. He caught him very clean with a right hand as Pereira was trying to pressure him. So if you were trying to make the argument that I think Pereira is going to try to pressure Hill really hard, and when he does, Hill's going to catch him and rock him, that makes a lot more sense than, I don't trust Pereira's chin. But where I think Hill is going to struggle in this fight is that typically when he finishes a fight, it's because he lands long combinations. Of course, like I said earlier, anybody 205 and up has the potential to knock you out with one punch. But, when he finished Johnny Walker in round 1, it was because he caught him with a clean right hand as Johnny was practically running at him face first. Typically, when you look at Hill's fight with Glover or his fight with Thiago Santos, he eventually starts really moving in with combinations to try to finish the fight. And that's where it gets really dangerous because, like I said, Pereira's counters are so short and so precise. They're built to deal with someone trying to unload on you. We know Hill's game plan is going to be to land the straight right. There's a very, very low chance he's going to be able to knock Alex out with one punch, so he's going to need to move in with more, and that is when he is in the most amount of trouble. Because Jamahal really has a tendency to start unloading on guys as the fight goes on, and Alex Pereira is just not the person you want to do that to. So I can see Jamahal hurting Pereira if he's able to back him up to the fence. But out in the open, the way Pereira utilizes his movement, the way he could even throw calf kicks against southpaw fighters to their lead leg, and with how devastating his short counters are, I think all around this fight's a bit too dangerous for Jamahal Hill. Now, if you want to be uber safe on this parlay, which I always recommend, then I would bet on this fight going past 1.5 rounds. Jamahal coming off this injury, and of course with Pereira's power, it would make sense for him to come out a bit more tentative. And Jamahal has really shown to start getting wild as the fight goes on. So if you want to be really safe, I would go with that. But I do feel confident picking Alex Pereira to win this fight. So I think this is going to be my ticket. $25 to win $550. I don't like betting more than $20-$25. If you're doing this on every single pay-per-view, something fluky is bound to happen. If you want to add Jiri or Calvin Kattar to the parlay, it's going to make that payout even more substantial. But I think with everything I've laid out today, this is the safest bet you can make to win.